Welcome back to our channel. We are Bitcoin Magazine and we are live right outside of Amsterdam at the Sugar Factory for Bitcoin Amsterdam 2025. Presented by Treasury. Yes, it is now an official Dutch event handled by our own people and we are so happy about that. So, like we've been doing all day, we've been sitting down with the key opinion leaders, the CEOs, the founders, the people who actually push forward every ecosystem in our cryptoverse. And I'm using that word, cryptoverse. Why? I get to sit down with Ben. Ben's been in this space making videos for about 6 years. He steps off stage and a line forms. I'm not talking like 2 or 3 people. I'm talking about 30 people standing in line just to shake his hand. And I walked up to one of them and I asked them, "How do you know Ben?" And his exact words were, "He made me a lot of money." So you know what to do. Like this video, share this video, and help us keep pushing forward mass adoption right here in the Netherlands and worldwide. Ben, it is a pleasure to meet you.
It's great to meet you as well.
People stood in line just to shake your hand and take a picture. It was very cool because there's a lot of famous people in this event. They get off stage, people just wave and they go on. But with you, and I can feel the sentiment. People appreciate you. People see you and you have a level of trustworthiness that's very high into the cryptoverse. 6 years making videos. How have you maintained that level of professionalism for so long?
It's a good question. I tried to speak my mind. I, generally speaking, and this has always been the case, my opinion about the markets is not for sale. So I think that's something that it's kind of hard to come by in the crypto space. A lot of people will say certain things because they're paid to say certain things, and that leads to a level of distrust. And so I don't have my opinion paid for at all, and I just speak my mind, even if it goes against what the general consensus view is.
Oh,
And I try to hold on to those opinions as much as I can, and I am very stubborn when it comes to certain market views, but I also will admit when I'm wrong, and I try not to hide behind that. I try to be honest and try to have a level of integrity that I would want other people to exhibit. And so by doing that, I mean, at times it's difficult when everyone is screaming certain things are going to happen, and it's tempting to want to join in. But I try to just stay true to what I believe, and I think over the long haul, people appreciate that.
now, you just said something very important there, the screaming. There are a lot of people screaming. And how do you make sure to not scream in a market that's so, let's use the word volatile? A tweet, a macroeconomic event, everything has an effect on the market. How do you make sure not to also have an effect on the way you think based on those things?
I generally subscribe, and there's truth to the way monetary policy absolutely affects markets. Um, the president tweeting out certain things can have an effect on markets. But generally, what I subscribe to, and has served me well, is I believe that the narrative follows the price. And so price leads. And so a lot of times what we do as humans, and I've done this before as well, is price will go in one direction and then we'll try to find a reason for it.
Yep.
It's always hard to find the reason before that happens, though. And so that's why I think narrative generally follows price. So whenever I see headlines, I kind of assume that the headline that and then the price action, the people that are reacting to it, they're more so interpreting the headline based on what the price is doing. Sometimes there's really good events and price will go down, and sometimes there's really bad events and price will go up, and it doesn't always make a lot of sense.
No.
But if you believe if you trust the charts and you say these things are just repetitive, they're going to repeat themselves, human psychology will never change. It's always been the same way. It's always going to be. Then I think it's easier to tune out the noise. It's easier to say, you know what, that stuff doesn't matter as much as we think it does. Let's just focus on the bigger picture, right? And the bigger picture with Bitcoin is buying, so like getting a position in it and then holding it for the long term, right? And simple, right? And the thing is like a lot of people they want to think that the way to be successful in the space is to do all these crazy trades with like all these different cryptocurrencies but really the way to be successful is buy Bitcoin and forget about it for 10 years and come back. Yeah. That's the right, and people want to make it more complicated than that, but it really doesn't have to be.
You know something? I don't know if you know him, Michael van der Poppe. He's very known here in Europe. He's also an analyst. And I sat down with him last week at another event, and he said the 4-year cycle doesn't really exist. It's pure coincidence that it happens. Do you also see it that way?
Well, so I don't think the 4-year cycle is based around the halving.
Okay.
The halving obviously occurs approximately every 4 years, so it's easy to assume that it's based on the halving. And I do think the halving does have some effect, right? Like, there's no doubt about it that if you reduce the issuance, like, it's going to have some positive effect. But 4-year cycles have existed long before Bitcoin was created.
Yes.
If you look at the S&P 500, there was a macro low in 1958, 1962, 1966, 1970, 1974, 1978, and then 1982. So that lasted for about 2.5 decades, where you had a 4-year cycle, a low in the market every 4 years or so.
Yeah.
Now, eventually that broke, and there was not a major low in 1986, and it ended up being in 1987. So with Bitcoin, the reality is eventually it will break. Like, it's not going to be a 4-year cycle forever. It will eventually break. The question is like, when is it going to break, right? Is it going to break this time? Is it going to break next time? I generally assume that it's not going to break. And then when it does, just acknowledging at that point, all right, it's finally broken. And then let's try to figure out what's going to happen now. But for the longest time, I've always just been a believer in the 4-year cycle, primarily because that's what my own experiences have taught me, right? Like 2014, 2018, and 2022 were not the best times for the price, but you know what they were the best times for? Buying Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Right. And so a lot of people don't really like the bear market years, but they actually are a great opportunity for those.
Necessary.
They're necessary, and it's a natural part of the cycle. And it resets all the froth in the cycle, right? All the things that really shouldn't exist. It resets all that sentiment. And then it sets up for the next multi-year bull market.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're a believer in Bitcoin, the midterm years are some of the best years, because as long as you don't have a knee-jerk reaction to price dropping and you can see the opportunity for what it is, you're going to look back at that in a few years and be really happy, right? Like, everyone today in 2025 looks back at 2022 and they were able to buy Bitcoin at 15K.
Exactly.
So think about what 2029 might look like, and, what prices you might be able to buy Bitcoin for in 2026. At the time, it might feel scary. It might feel somewhat uncertain, but a few years later, you're going to be happy that it happened. So I believe, like, trade the market you have, not the market that you want. And then you'll be successful.
You used the keyword again, belief. Do you believe that for the mass adoption to actually take place in this market, mainstream, the way they say it, people need to believe more in Bitcoin?
I think a lot of it is people equate Bitcoin with other aspects of crypto that sort of give Bitcoin about reps. But Bitcoin has nothing to do with that stuff, right? You could argue that, like, the crypto industry as a whole, I mean, it's exposed certain bad traits in certain sectors, right?
Yes.
But Bitcoin and crypto are not necessarily synonymous with each other, right? Bitcoin can exist from one cycle to another, but that doesn't mean everything else will necessarily. So I think we're going through, and especially this cycle, I think we're going through a maturity process where a lot of investors are slowly starting to recognize that Bitcoin is sort of like the northern light in crypto. But a lot of that you can't tell someone and have them believe it. Like, I can't tell someone that's never been in crypto, hey, Bitcoin is the main thing that matters. What they have to do, unfortunately, is people get into the space, they get into Bitcoin, they buy other things like altcoins. Some of them make money, a lot of them round trip it, some of those go to zero, and then they find their way back to Bitcoin eventually. So I think this cycle, a lot of people have kind of found their way back to Bitcoin as they've seen other investments in the space not really give the same types of returns. And a lot of the altcoins just end up bleeding to Bitcoin over a long enough period of time anyways. So I think really what we need, what Bitcoin needs, and what's always needed is just time, right? Time for people to sort of accept it. And even this cycle, I've seen so many people that completely discounted Bitcoin in 2022 and 2023 and 2024. And now they're finally starting to see the light. Like, they're finally starting to see it as an asset that's going to stand the test of time. And you see that every cycle, right?
Yeah.
The people that don't believe in it in the midterm year start believing in it in the post-halving year.
Yeah.
It can often set up a euphoric rally to the top, and then we go through the bear market, and then we just repeat it again.
And it goes round and round.
The cycle doesn't change. It just happens. It always plays out, and we always try to figure out a way why it's different, and then it ends up not being different.
Now, one of the big changes that's going to be happening in the next coming cycles is the institutions, private institutions, normal non-decentralized institutions moving into the market. And as they keep buying up Bitcoin, it removes this from the on-chain aspect of it.
Right.
How does Bitcoin protect itself? How do we remain resilient with all of this privatized off-chain Bitcoin?
I honestly think that it's just the natural evolution of Bitcoin. In order for Bitcoin to continue moving up, right? In order for it to ever reach, say, like $1 million per coin, which I think it eventually will, right? I think it eventually will. The natural evolution is that you have to have institutions come in, right? Because as the market cap increases, it takes exponentially more volume to move the price every additional 10x.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, like, when the market cap was only, say, a million, it did not take a lot to move the price of Bitcoin. When the market cap is 2 trillion or 3 trillion, or maybe in the future 10 trillion or 20 trillion, it just takes way more volume to move effort. Yeah. And so I think a lot of that, I mean, it's just the natural evolution of the space. I don't really view it as a bad thing, but I do think as crypto analysts, we might have to incorporate that. It makes some of the on-chain data a little bit more difficult to interpret sometimes if the Bitcoin's not even really moving on chain.
Yeah.
Right. And so we can look at that. We can look at ETF flows, maybe adding in like what's going on with the ETFs, adding that into the on-chain data, looking at what the institutions are doing. I think it's just the natural evolution of the space, and I don't think it's worth really fighting. It's just kind of the direction it was always going to go.
Okay. And as the space keeps progressing, and I see the enthusiasm and the positiveness in what you say, but from the other side, quantum computing is going to be a problem. AI is going to be a problem. Off-chain is going to be a problem. Not your keys and, seed phrase is going to be a problem. All we keep hearing are doom scenarios.
Right.
How do you set your followers at peace?
So my background is actually in
Don't tell me. Nuclear engineering.
yes.
I actually saw that, and I was like, how does that translate
Yeah, I know.
to Bitcoin? But
Yeah.
doom scenario.
Yeah, so I did my postdoc in high energy density physics, and so I knew people back then that were interested in quantum computing and like exploring all that stuff. And back in 2017, a lot of people asked me about how is quantum computing going to affect things. And back then there was a lot of doom scenarios as well. Like, and that was when Bitcoin was trading for like $4,000 or $5,000.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking back then, like, there's always it's called climbing the wall of worry for a reason, right?
Yeah.
There's always going to be a reason like why someone thinks they shouldn't invest. Um, as far as quantum computing goes, at some point at some point it might become an issue. But as I said a decade ago, and as I'll say again today, I don't really think that's the primary concern right now. And I hope that maybe by that point, Bitcoin can become somewhat quantum resistant. I mean, there's certainly could be more development in that space, but I kind of choose not to spend a lot of time thinking about that stuff, primarily because like I want to be optimistic. I think in general, and this is something I've learned maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. The bears sound smart, but the bulls make money. Right. And so like it's not hard to sound smart about doom scenarios. And at some point, like there will be downturns in the economy, right? There will be that's a natural thing, but I don't think it's worth spinning our wheels worrying about it for years and years and years just for it to happen once every 1 or 2 decades, right? Like it's gonna happen. When it happens, we deal with it at the time. But I think in the meantime, it has and hopefully continues to just pay to be optimistic. And
I keep moving forward towards it. Into the cryptoverse, at the core of it, what you guys do is education. You're trying to create awareness. You're trying to simplify. I saw it on the website, simplification of the process. The process keeps getting simpler, but do you feel that it's going hand in hand with adoption?
I mean, what's really interesting is this cycle adoption by retail hasn't really happened in the same way that we would have expected.
Yeah.
It's been mostly institutions this cycle. Um, so you could argue that retail adoption is actually kind of lagging behind right now.
Yeah.
And I honestly I don't think it's anything related to Bitcoin though. Like I don't think it's Bitcoin's fault. I think that it's like a business. Like a business can control what goes on in the four walls of the company, but it cannot control what goes on outside the company. Bitcoin cannot control what's happening, with monetary policy and interest rates. Like it cannot control that. it can do the best it's going to do, but there's going to be some people that might not be able to sort of buy Bitcoin or adopt it in the way they would have if we were living in an environment where inflation wasn't as big of an issue, or the labor market, we weren't as worried about AI taking jobs, right? So I think that has had some effect, but again, in being optimistic, we have to assume eventually that's just going to it's going to catch back up, and retail interest will come back. So that's kind of how I would describe it this cycle.
You're one of the many people who sat in front of me today, and a lot of them have a very bullish outlook for 2026. As an analyst, no price prediction, no financial advice, but do you see a bullish market coming up? Or do you say, no, people, the bear market is coming up and we have to get through it?
So one of the interesting things about this cycle is there has not really been a euphoric rally,
Yeah.
like there has been in prior cycles where retail flooded in. And so I'm of the opinion right now that I do think the top will be this year for this cycle. But because we haven't really had maybe we have a euphoric rally before the end of the year, right? The year's not over, so let's be optimistic and hope we do. But if we don't, I think it's going to play out like 2019 because it's also very similar in terms of social interest. It's similar in terms of monetary policy. The Fed was bringing the Fed funds rate down below the neutral rate back then as well, below maybe the sort of the 2-year yield, and we're almost there. Maybe one or two more rate cuts, and we'll be there. I think it's like 2019, and so what I see happening is I see some brief headwinds for the first half of 2026.
Okay.
And I think those headwinds are not going to be Bitcoin related. I think it's going to be mostly that the Federal Reserve is going to be Jerome Powell specifically is going to be very hesitant to cut rates.
Yep.
Because he's leaving his post in May.
Yes, he is.
And I think they're going to replace him with someone who's a lot more dovish.
Extremely.
Extremely. And so what I could see happening, I could see just interest not really moving from here, and that being sort of a headwind for the next few months. But I think by the time we get out to mid 2026, late 2026, things will start picking back up again. Because I think the next chair of the Federal Reserve is going to do everything he can to rekindle the animal spirits in all of us.
Yes.
And that's kind of how I see the cycle playing out. So I see some brief headwinds. I don't think we're going to have an 80% drop next year. I'm not calling for that. And the reason I would say that is because we haven't had a euphoric blow off top rally.
Yeah.
If Bitcoin would have rallied to 250K or something in a month, then I would say, all right, maybe we need a 70 or 80% drawdown.
Exactly.
But if we don't have that, I see it kind of playing out like 2019, where price kind of goes sideways, maybe slightly down. And then once we get more rate cuts under our belt, once monetary policy loosens up, I see things kind of continuing on. So I think the 4-year cycle, when we view this in many years, I think we'll say, all right, the 4-year cycle played out. But if you sort of view it through the lens of monetary policy and kind of the transition from QT to QE, I think that other guys that are talking about sort of like other views on the market, like I don't think they're necessarily wrong. Like I think you could interpret their view as right, but they just needed to delay it by 6 to 12 months.
All right.
If that's back. Yeah, just push it back. Be like, all right, let's have a consolidation phase in 2026. And the thing is, Bitcoin went up 8x. It's like, right? Like, I mean, this is the one asset class where the blue chip of the industry can go up on with 10x and people are upset.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it went up a lot. It's okay if you have like a 30% or 40% drop. Like, that's not a big deal. It just resets sentiment. It allows people to get in who have been kind of waiting. And it just kind of sets us up for the next cycle.
Yeah. Very good. So, Ed, I'm going to use your word. We have not had a euphoric rally.
Right.
Very good. And because of that, you can expect not to actually drop as well as much as you would if we had a euphoric rally.
Exactly. And even without that, every cycle so far has had diminishing losses each bear market. The first bear market was a 94% drop. The second was 87. The third was 84. And the fourth was 77.
Yeah.
So every single bear market has actually gotten a little bit more manageable. So regardless, I mean, I would just expect that trend to continue, right? And also with institutions, you're going to have less volatility, right? An institution, ideally, is not going to be as quick to panic sell as a retail investor who might buy the top.
Exactly. Very good. So, in short, this was a masterclass in crypto. 20 minutes of deep information, not financial advice, but the best advice I do believe you can get to be able to run your finances. We had the honor of sitting here with Ben into the Cryptoverse. He was one of the most interesting discussions right here at Bitcoin Amsterdam 2025. So share this video, leave a comment, make sure people see this, and we will keep pushing towards 2026 you need information, you want to understand what's going on in the cryptoverse, visit Ben's website, watch his videos, and we will see you all back right here for the next event. Ben,
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.